When this man planned his trip to the woods, he had no idea it would become a nightmare. The plan was to come there for peace and tranquility. But instead, his camera captured something that sent shivers down his spine. Shortly after the picture was taken, he had to run for his life. Man takes picture in the woods, immediately starts running when he sees this. The day when all hell broke loose started pretty normal. Kevin planned a day out in the forest for light walking. He loved to do this as often as possible, especially when it was combined with taking pictures of nature. But that relaxing feeling stopped when he saw something from the corner of his eye. The tranquility in the forest was disturbed when Kevin spotted a mysterious shimmer about 30 feet away from him. It could have been an animal, a person, heck, it could have been Bigfoot. Kevin really couldn't tell. One thing was for certain, it sure was fast. And Kevin decided to follow it. Kevin saw the dense undergrowth move around and heard the rustle of leaves on the forest floor. He used them as a guide to find whatever caused them. Soon, Kevin was filled with thorns from sharp bushes, and the dens of vegetation disoriented him. But then he saw something shoot between a couple of trees. With one swift motion, Kevin placed the camera before his eye and snapped a picture, hoping to capture whatever was running from him. But unfortunately, the camera only showed him a vague shimmer. It did give the curious photographer a clue, though. The thing was about 3 feet tall. What is it? Sadly, the picture was all he would get at the moment because the forest floor went quiet again. It must have gotten away from me, Kevin said, defeated. He decided to use the zoom function on his camera one more time to look around. But that was a decision he would soon come to regret. Because what the camera then spotted would alter his life forever. Kevin pointed the device south, and after a few minutes of looking, he spotted the moving bushes again. "It's the shimmer," he said enthusiastically. The mysterious thing moved quickly through the undergrowth and ran to a man-made structure in the distance. "That's a cabin." Kevin lowered his camera and stared at the wooden woodland house in awe. He never noticed it before, it was like it appeared out of nowhere. The curious photographer moved toward the structure slowly, observing it along the way. The cabin looked old and was completely overgrown with lush vegetation. Kevin knew that whatever he was following had gone to this place and was probably inside. But he found it hard to imagine that anyone or anything could live in such a place. It resembled more a musky grotto than a place for actual living. After Kevin reached the hut, he crouched beneath the windows. Even though Kevin found it hard to believe that the cabin bore any sign of life, light was still burning inside. Kevin hoisted his body further from the forest floor and peeked inside the window curiously. And that's when things took a bad turn. Inside was a massive man, at least 2 meters in height. The unknown individual stood with his back toward the window so Kevin could not see his face. But the sheer size of the man was imposing enough. An eerie feeling shot through Kevin's body. The dim light shining from within, combined with the well-hidden location of the cabin, gave the impression that onlookers weren't welcome. And an onlooker was exactly what Kevin was. Still, his gaze remained fixated on the man. At this point, he was still calm enough to think clearly. But that was about to change because when Kevin inspected the man's looks more closely, he saw that his whole back was covered in blood. The gigantic man stood in front of a wooden table, and Kevin could not see what was on there. The man's large body covered most of the wooden piece of furniture. However, the action that followed was something Kevin could see very clearly. The man lifted a large butcher's cleaver in the sky, and, with a loud and powerful smack, he rammed the butcher's cleaver into the table in front of him. It was a creepy scene to witness. Especially because Kevin couldn't see what the mysterious man was smacking into. But the moment the cleaver hit the table, a terrifying sound reached Kevin's ear. It was a scream so high and loud that it gave the curious photographer the jitters. This wasn't just a curious investigation anymore. Something seriously wrong was going on inside that cabin. The voice was that of a woman. But the moment the butcher lifted his cleaver, the room fell silent again. Kevin dove back underneath the window. He crouched down and speculated on what he had just heard and witnessed. And the more he thought about it, the more frightened he became. Did I just witness a murder? His mind went from unlikely to probable until it eventually felt almost certain. The person he butchered was probably the shimmer he followed her. The scream Kevin heard could have been that of a little girl. It certainly was high enough. Coming here was a mistake, and Kevin needed to escape here quickly. Head pushed his body away from the wall and started running, but the moment he took his first step, something horrible happened. His left foot stepped into a metal bucket beside the cabin, making Kevin fall and harshly hit the ground. This wasn't going according to plan, and when Kevin tried to get up and accidentally looked to the right, her fear instantly doubled. On her right was a large pile of ash, almost as tall as he was. It was still smoldering from a fire that probably burned a couple of hours ago. And in between that large pile of ash, Kevin saw a number of seizable bones. Are those from humans? Kevin felt true fear at that point. What have I gotten myself into? It was at that point that Kevin realized that his own life might be in danger. If the man inside the house was capable of such heinous acts, what kept him from carving into an innocent nature photographer? And that's when the cabin door started to move. Time to escape was running out, so the scared photographer quickly pulled his foot out of the bucket and started running. He just managed to make it to a dense bush on the side of the property in time. He hid there and watched as the scary-looking man exited the cabin. This was the first time Kevin saw the mysterious man from the front. The man had a large beard and an angry frown on his face. And Kevin also saw that the front of the man's shirt was equally as bloody as the back. The clanging of the metal bucket must have alarmed him. The murderous butcher looked around with a mad look in his eyes. He was searching for whatever caused the commotion outside of his cabin. While scanning the environment for the intruder, the butcher held his cleaver high in the sky. This was a threat to whoever was spying. And Kevin knew it was meant for him. If Kevin ran, the man would surely spot him, so he stayed hidden while trying to calm his breathing. If I stay hidden long enough without being seen, the man might go back inside thinking it was just a possum or something. But that plan failed almost instantly after it entered Kevin's mind. Because this giant of a man was patient, he kept looking around the area without moving from his spot, scanning each inch of the surrounding area. And after a couple of minutes, his eyes fell on the bushes Kevin was hiding in. And that's when the two men locked eyes. Kevin knew he was busted the moment that happened. He could no longer pretend to be an invisible guest of the forest. He had been discovered and had no choice but to run. Without hesitation, Kevin turned around and started running for his life. Panic shot through the frightened man's body. Kevin ran as fast as he could in this foreign place. He was unfamiliar with this part of the woods, but he knew his car was in the forest's northern part. While navigating the dense undergrowth, Kevin mustered all his strength to run and get away, afraid to look back. But the man followed him closely. Kevin knew this because he constantly heard footsteps behind him. After a 15-minute chase, Kevin reached an open piece of the forest. The footsteps he had heard behind him before had been quiet for a couple of minutes now, and Kevin figured he lost the man. Kevin used this time to catch his breath. His parked car couldn't be far away, so hopefully he could make it there in time. However, what Kevin did not know was that the situation he was in was far from over. The anxious photographer took 2 deep breaths and started his final stretch to freedom. While Kevin walked the final part to the edge of the forest, his mind began to wander. What have I just witnessed? Was that actually the hideout of a murderer? If I get out of here alive, nobody will ever believe this. After a few minutes, Kevin saw his car in the distance, but the vehicle was just 300 feet removed from where Kevin stood, and he could smell the freedom in the air. Time to get out of this crazy place before whoever that was finds me. Kevin quickened his pace and crossed the last open plain, but fate struck right before he reached his car. Kevin was already fiddling in her pants pockets, looking for the car keys to his salvation, and out of nowhere, the enormous man appeared again. He came from behind a set of trees in front of Kevin. Apparently, he circled around the forest area and was now blocking Kevin's path. Kevin was trapped. and with zero energy left in his body, it would be highly unlikely that he could make a second escape run. Still, he had to give it one last go. Kevin turned his body and ran the other way. But after a few steps, he heard these words, "Stop." These words did not come from the giant man who was chasing him. These belonged to a female, and a young one at that. Kevin turned around in confusion and stared at what was happening behind him. From behind the legs of the tall man, a little girl appeared, saying, "Please do not run." Kevin was still in panic mode but found the courage to address the mysterious duo. "What's going on? Are you going to kill me?" "I already have the police on speed dial, so don't do anything stupid," Kevin stated. But the response he got was the last thing Kevin expected. The girl asked Kevin to leave the police out of this. There was no need for it. "We come in peace and just want a chance to explain. Will you allow me and my father to do that?" Kevin looked at the tall man, who suddenly sported a kind face, confusing him even more. "Your father?" Kevin said with an expression that visualized the questions in his mind. "What is this place, and who are you people? Please tell me, and don't lie." Kevin was still on guard, and the tall man could see that. He stated once more that no harm would come to the frightened photographer. Kevin listened to those words, but still needed answers to some burning questions before ever considering trusting them. "What about all the blood on your shirt? Or the piles of ashes with human bones in them? And what about the female scream I heard? To me, it looks like a murder took place." The man said that even though it was real blood, it definitely wasn't human. "I shot a deer to feed my daughter and me this winter. I was butchering it, so that's where the blood came from. The bones belonged to that same deer. I burned the scraps to keep predatory animals away." Kevin nodded, indicating that he understood. He then asked about the scream. "That could not have been a deer. It was human." After that question, the girl took over. She stepped closer and showed the palm of her hand. "I tried to help my father, but cut myself in the progress. That scream was me." The girl removed some bandages from her hand and showed Kevin the fresh cut. They had an explanation for everything, which calmed Kevin a bit. But one question still plagued his mind. "What are you doing here? Why do you live in the forest all by yourself in such a worn-down cabin?" Kevin already felt that a heartbreaking explanatory story was coming up. And when both father and daughter dropped down on a fallen tree, that thought was confirmed. They invited Kevin to join them, and Kevin was calm enough at that point to trust them. He obliged and listened to their sad tale. The large man introduced himself as Morgan Larson, and the girl's name was Millie. They had lived in the old cabin for about a year without anyone noticing it. They did not do it by choice, though. A few months before that, Morgan lost his wife after a long illness. And it had big consequences. Morgan got stuck in a depression and was a mere shimmer of his former self. He ended up losing his job. And with that, he also lost his house and everything he and his wife built together. It was horrible, and my daughter was suffering the consequences, too. They only had one option left. Morgan's father left him the forest cabin after he died many years ago, and it has stood abandoned ever since. But it was the perfect spot for Morgan and his daughter to rebuild and heal. It wasn't a 4-star hotel, but it was home. And together, they made it work. There was only one problem. Even though the father-daughter duo loved living in the forest and learned how to live off the land quickly, one part of forest life wasn't so nice. Millie adored her dad, but forest life could get lonely occasionally, especially for an 8-year-old girl. Millie said goodbye to all her friends, but she had none here. Kevin listened intently to Morgan's story and had tears in his eyes when the words stopped. He understood now and felt for their hardship. He wanted to help and even came up with a solution. He stated that he had a daughter of his own. And she was just 1 year younger than Millie. "I will come back and bring her," Kevin said enthusiastically. He got in his car and looked back at the tall man as he drove away. He saw him and his daughter in a new light and was eager to help. The next day, He returned to the cabin and suddenly noticed it looked different. The place was still old and made of wood, and plants still covered most of it. But it wasn't as scary anymore. Kevin's mind clearly played tricks on him the day before because he was scared. When Kevin and his daughter entered the cabin, it even felt warm and homely. What a nice place. The two daughters played together and immediately hit it off. So, with that promising start, they agreed to come by every week for a playdate. The two fathers also became close friends. Kevin also learned a valuable lesson that day. Never judge a book by its cover. Be open-minded and let people in.